instead of facing head on into the wave and going over it, I tried to take it from the stern and got caught almost sideways. There was definitely a split second there that I thought I was going over. Luckily, I was able to keep her upright and took on a little bit of water.
This is the Adventure Sports Podcast, where we talk to athletes, adventurers, and business owners from around the world of adventure sports. Whether you're climbing Mount Everest, starting a bike shop, or getting up off your couch to take your kids hiking for the first time, we want you to have the motivation and inspiration you need to chase that next adventure. The Adventure Sports Podcast is brought to you by Camp Crate, the leaders in fully planned self-guided backpacking adventures, as well as backpacking gear rental. You can check them out at campcrate.net. Paddling the Mississippi River has always been kind of one of those things I've always wanted to do. You know, those kind of like, if you ever want to do a big trip, the Mississippi would be awesome. Well, today we are going, it's a revisited episode, of course, and Curt hosted this one back in November of 2017. He interviewed Will Collins while he was on his trip. We've been doing a lot of on-trip interviews lately, and I think it's awesome just to hear from people in the middle of the adventure. What is it really like? How do you feel right now? Last week we had Jeremiah Foose. He's right in the middle of doing the Appalachian Trail. And actually over the weekend, I got to go see one of our biggest Adventure Sports Podcast fans, and I believe the first patron, William Cairns. He's doing the Tour Divide, and we got to catch him. Me and my buddy went and saw him in Sargents, Colorado, about almost 2,000 miles into the Tour Divide. But William has been on the show before, and he's talking about adventure racing. He's from South Africa, like I said, and it is just so cool to me to be able to see people in the middle of their trip, especially when they're friends of the show, patrons of the show, big fan, and this Adventure Sports Podcast community just stretches literally across the globe. We get emails all the time from people all over the world. Such a cool community, and I promise that we're going to be working more to make this community thrive and provide more opportunities for the listeners of this show to pursue their adventures. That's what it's about, and we want to not only talk about adventure, but help you get out there and do your own, because that's what it's about. So thanks for tuning in today. Today's sponsors are two fantastic companies, Athletic Brewing, the makers of non-alcoholic craft beer. Give them a shot. You know, if you're training for something, or if you're a new parent, you don't want to be intoxicated, but you like a good beer, a good tasting beer after a day's work or on the weekend, give Athletic Brewing a shot. They are making moves. They're growing. Fantastic company, and I'm proud to promote them, as well as CS Instant Coffee. I got to take some CS Instant Coffee with me over the weekend when I went backpacking, and it was just awesome to wake up in the mountains, make a really good cup of coffee, and not have to drag a bunch of equipment with me into the backcountry. It was great. Discount for both of those in the show notes. And by the way, next Thursday, we're going to play the episode where Will Collins actually finishes paddling the entire Mississippi and get to hear what it was like for the second half.
Hi friends, Curt here. Thanks again for tuning in to the Adventure Sports Podcast. I've got a really special treat for you today. We caught up with Will Collins. He is currently on his adventure going down the Mississippi in a canoe, full length of the Mississippi. I'm really excited. You can hear the crickets and the frogs and stuff in the background. He's actually out there right now. So, Will Collins, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much, Curt. Really excited to be on the program, and I've loved listening to some of the past episodes as I've been cruising down the water and cruising down the Mississippi. So happy to be here.
Well, that's a lot of fun. So, Will, I don't know a lot about your background, but I love what you're doing right now, and I want to hear about it. I'm going to divulge something here. Just the last couple of weeks, I've crossed the actual source of the Arkansas River probably 6 times in the last 4 weeks. And I keep on looking at that because the Arkansas River flows near my hometown in Oklahoma where I grew up. And I keep on thinking, man, I could get an inflatable, kayak, and I could take that until I got big enough to just prefer a canoe, and canoe all the way back to northeastern Oklahoma. And that's been kind of just a thought, a seed in the back of my mind. But here you are doing that, not on the Arkansas, but on the much bigger, much crazier Mississippi River. Man, that's crazy. So what got you thinking about going on a trip the length of the Mississippi River?
Yeah, it's been a blast, Curt. I'll tell you what. It's been utterly amazing. I'm on day 65 here at the moment, but getting the ball rolling in terms of what made me want to do it, I think it's just an adventurous soul. Is really just for the sake of adventure that I wanted to try it. I grew up, paddling the rivers and lakes of northern Wisconsin, and I was lucky enough to go to a summer camp that got me outside and got me, acquainted with the wilderness. And I kind of had just a taking to it. And I was able to do some longer trips and bigger trips as I got older. And in the back of my mind, I always knew that I wanted to do a big trip. I wasn't quite sure what that trip was. And then for whatever reason, the Mississippi River, it just pulled me. I think it's just a really massive and beautiful and amazing river and a resource that we have in this country. I mean, it drains 31 states, and any state in between the Appalachian Mountains and the Rocky Mountains, the watershed eventually dumps into the Mississippi River. It spans the border of 11 different states. So I start in northern Minnesota, and I'll end up in the Gulf of Mexico, south of New Orleans, Louisiana. And, you have the Nile River, you have the Amazon, and then the Mississippi is right up there. And, for whatever reason, it just drew me, and, it's been an amazing adventure so far.
Sounds really, really cool. I've long wondered what it would be like to go the length of the Mississippi. That's the kind of adventure that tickles my fancy. It's one way to say it. And here's a lesser known fact. And it might be depending on how you measure things, but I'll go ahead and present it anyway. If you counted the Mississippi, where the Missouri and the Mississippi come together, if you counted Mississippi as a tributary and the Missouri as the main river, so we just reversed which river was the main river, then that water system, the Missouri River to New Orleans, is longer than the Nile.
Yeah, it's pretty mind blowing when you start to look at all those numbers. And I'm sitting on the shore right now here, not too far from Cairo, Illinois, the border of Kentucky and Illinois. And man, it's a big river. I got a big sandy shore here, and I'm looking across the way. There's some big stone bluffs, and the trees are turning. And it is a big watershed. And I think it's gone to the back of our minds as a conscious, I think, in the country. For whatever reason, folks think it's polluted or it's dirty, or I hear those terms fairly often, but I couldn't be further from the truth from my experience so far. It's been pristine, and it is well traveled in terms of barges and shipping routes, but man, it's just been amazing. Big islands, lots of water flowing, and it's been beautiful.
Well, I was just kind of looking upriver at the areas where you have already been, and maybe, you know what, I want to go down your route so far and pull in some of the experiences that you've had along the way. But before we dive into that, because that's really the meat of the show here, I'd like to rewind a little bit and visit more about how you came to do this. You mentioned that did you grow up in Wisconsin then?
No, I actually grew up in northern Illinois. I went to a summer camp called, I'll give them a shout out here, Camp Manitouish YMCA. I was in northern Wisconsin, as many summer camps are, and had the opportunity to go on camping trips, and not your RV trips, but intense and paddling and cooking on a fire. And as a kid, I was able to do that, and as I progressed through that camp, I was able to go on a 30-day canoe trip in Saskatchewan and a 45-day backpacking trip in Alaska. And those two trips, man, that really changed my life, kind of cemented adventure for me and a longing for wild places. And ever since then, I kind of knew that I needed to do some sort of big trip, and for whatever reason, the Mississippi pulled me in.
Awesome. So then after that, you went to CU, University of Colorado. Is that right?
I did, yeah. Go Buffs. Yep. I was studied in Boulder, studied journalism there in Boulder, and loved it and got out in the mountains, or the Rocky Mountains. It's also has a big piece of my heart, the Rockies. Skiing and a little bit of climbing and fishing and all the great stuff that the Rockies have to offer. And lived and worked in Denver for a little bit after that, doing some radio stuff, and then moved to South Dakota. Did some radio stuff for about 2 years in South Dakota before I decided to take the plunge here on the Mississippi, and I'll be returning to South Dakota after the trip as well.
Wow. Okay, so what is it that made you say to yourself, now's the time, that gave you the boot out the door to actually take on this epic adventure right now at this point in your life?
Well, it had been something that I always wanted to do. I thought about doing it the year before, and for better or for worse, probably for worse, I let the voices in my head and people talk me out of it. Your career, this, that, stick with what you're doing. And then by the time this summer came, there was just something in my gut, that I couldn't keep down, that told me you have to just do it. And it was scary, man. I'll tell you, it was scary, walking in my boss's office and the weeks before that, thinking I thought that I was going to have to quit my job. So that was kind of the plan. And it was kind of gut wrenching that time, but I knew for whatever reason, I knew deep down that I had to do it. And so I walked into the boss's office, and the day before I thought, well, you know what, rather than just quitting straight up, why not see if there's an opportunity to come back? So sure enough, I pitched that, hey, this is what I'm going to do. It's kind of a bucket list trip. I love working here. I'd love to come back if the opportunity is there. If not, I understand and I'll be on my way. But I like working here. Love the people that I work with. So if I could come back after the trip, I'd love to do that. And sure enough, that stuck. So that's the plan as of now.
Right on. So it doesn't always work out that way, but you got to the point where it was a matter of, if I have to quit my job for this, then that's too bad, but that's where it's going to end up. But you got the leave of absence instead. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's maybe one of the takeaways for me from the trip is that you never know until you try. You never know how things are going to go. You have all these ideas in your mind about the way things might go down or what might happen or the way people perceive you. But if you actually take the time to ask them and rather than having in your own perception of what they're thinking, if you take the time to ask them, lots of times it's different in reality than what you think how things would unfold.
I like that. That's encouraging. It's a reminder to us all to not just assume things. If you have a big dream, then kind of check out the parameters. You might find out that there are doors that can open up you wouldn't anticipate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really, really cool. So, you're doing this solo, it sounds like.
I am. Yeah. I couldn't find anybody crazy enough or dumb enough to join me.
Well, and it is now the end of October, and you've made it to the southern tip of Illinois. So it sounds like you're probably going to stay ahead of the worst of winter, but you've probably already had some pretty cool nights.
Yeah, last night was certainly a chilly one. I woke up to some condensation on the inside of the tent, and nothing too crazy. I think it was hovering, around the low 40s, maybe high 30s. But I'm prepared for the cold weather. I've done some winter camping and cold camping, so I got the gear and. But yeah, I'm hoping to stay ahead of it for most of the part as I keep traveling south. It's been pretty cool too. As I started in northern Minnesota at the headwaters of the Mississippi near Bemidji, Minnesota. And as I've been traveling south, I've almost been following the line of fall. The trees were starting to turn up in northern Minnesota. And as I've been traveling south, it seems like the same amount of trees are turning here in southern Illinois and in between as well. So that's been kind of neat.
Oh, that is neat. So you're on day 65. It's the end of October. So what day did you start? Sounds like maybe August.
Yeah, I started, it would have been August 23rd was my start date.
August 23rd.
From the headwaters of the Mississippi, where it's just a little babbling creek.
So did you start in August because it just happened to be August, or was that the plan to try to do a fall trip?
No, yeah, it just worked out that that's when I got the goal to to make the trip happen, and just so happened to work out then. But it's been great, as I mentioned, the fall colors, and plus with a little bit of the cooler weather. Certainly hasn't been cold, but with a little of the cooler weather, they kept some of the mosquitoes down in the wilderness of northern Minnesota. Which, if you've ever been up there, you know that's no joke.
Yeah, no joke at all. So I've been, just kind of as we're talking here, I've been tracing the Mississippi River, and I've made it into northern Minnesota, and I'm starting to lose track of it on my poor map. So where is the beginning of the Mississippi, and what does that look like? Is it possible? I know that a lot of people have wanted to be able to actually go from the Great Lakes and somehow get to the Mississippi, but it doesn't look like that's the actual headwaters.
No, yeah, the headwaters, which depending on who you ask, there is a little bit of controversy surrounding where the actual headwaters are. But for all intents and purposes, the headwaters that most folks have been considering for the last couple hundred years is a lake called Lake Itasca. It's about a 45-minute drive from Bemidji, Minnesota, and it's a lake. They have a little rock crossing across the Mississippi as it flows out of the lake, and they say that you can walk across the Mississippi River at that point. But really, it's just a tiny little creek that you might find in the backyard of somebody's farm or something like that. It's the first 3 or 4 days were spent fighting through swamp and super thick vegetation and just trying to find where the creek flowed. There's lots of times where I had to stand up in the boat and look over thick weed beds just to determine where the water was flowing.
So I was curious about that. I am almost there. I keep on scrolling the map. It looks like getting started could have been a little bit dicey, kind of tough.
Yeah, it was certainly in low water as it was when I started. It's just bog, really. It's just a big swamp. Lots of wild rice and all kinds of waterfowl, and pretty remote in terms of wilderness. Not super remote, but not much around. And yeah, it's really just fighting through thick vegetation. There's lots of times where you have to get out of your boat and walk it and pull it through swamp. And it was really neat experience though, and beautiful country up there.
At what point did it start to feel like, okay, this is actually truly navigable? I can just go now.
Yeah, I would say after Lake Bemidji, which is in Bemidji, Minnesota. After that, it was wider, but still not to the point that you would think of as the Mississippi River. It was navigable, but I wouldn't say you really truly felt like it was the Mississippi until I don't know, maybe halfway through Minnesota, several hundred miles in.
Wow. And now you're on the big water, and you've been on the big water for weeks. That's got to be a totally different experience. And, as you travel the river, you mentioned that so far it's been pretty pristine. We know it gets dirtier as you go down, so the river's going to change. The flow is changing. The scenery is changing. Can you encapsulate how that's been for you so far?
Yeah, it's been wild. Seeing, especially thinking back to the headwaters and that swamp and bog in terms of what I'm looking at right now as I'm speaking to you, Curt. It's just maybe 200 yards, maybe even longer across, and all kinds of different currents within the river, huge eddies, really just big water. And it's certainly not clear water. It's a bit muddy at this point, but man, yeah, it's really big water, I guess, is the only way I could describe it. There's barges going back and forth, and as I've got south of St. Louis, the barge traffic is picked up, and these are massive shipping containers essentially being pushed through the river, and they create quite the wake. So that's its own little game and obstacle in itself is staying clear of those barges, but it keeps it interesting.
Well, some of the logistics, did you have to pull any permits to do this?
No, it was very pretty straightforward in terms of logistics, which is part of the reason why I was interested in it and was able to do it without too much planning. For the most part, there's towns along the way, so I usually take about 5 to 7 days worth of food with me and water at a time. And then I'll stop into a town, for instance, Cairo. I'll try and stop in Cairo there at the confluence of the Ohio and the Mississippi and pick up some more food and water. And no permits necessary. Just hop in your boat and start floating.
Have you wished that you had a marine radio of some sort to let the barges know you're there? Do you need that?
Yeah, I do actually have a small handheld marine radio, and it was certainly useful. There's 29 locks and dams on the Mississippi, and I've gotten south of those now. Those ended in St. Louis, and basically it's similar to the Panama Canal, where there's a big two massive steel gates on either side. There's a big dam and then a chamber. They fill the chamber up with water and lower or raise the level of that water to either the upstream side or the downstream side, which are at different elevations. And on that marine radio, I certainly call into those dams as you pull up to them, locks, and give them a heads up that you're coming through, and they'll raise the water level for you, or they'll let you know that, hey, we have a barge in the lock at the moment. It'll be an hour or so until we can get you through. So then you relax a little bit and wait for the barge to go through. But yeah, you get locked through all of those, and that's quite the process too. Just the engineering that goes into those locks and dams is pretty remarkable.
Well, you're in a pretty small craft for those. Do they make you share it with other boats, or are they willing to flood that just for your canoe?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. A lot of people are surprised with that as well. There's they'll flood it for any boat, one canoe, a fishing boat, or a massive barge that's 1,000 feet long. They can't impede traffic, so they'll do it for anybody. And you just float on by. It's a little intimidating, certainly for the first couple for the first couple locks, but then you get used to it, and it's just a normal process. But yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool experience.
And you've made it through the last of those now, so now it's just slow, free-flowing river.
Yeah, free-flowing all the way to the Gulf of Mexico.
So it's been 65 days so far. Are you on schedule, or is it taking longer, or has it gone faster than you thought?
Yeah, I kind of anticipated it to take about 90 days. I would say it's gone a touch slower than I thought, but mostly that's just due to the generosity of people that I've met along the way. It's been that's one of the big takeaways of the trip I've had so far. I've just met so many amazing people that have taken me into their homes, fed me, let me stay with them, complete strangers, giving me showers, some laundry. And so I've definitely taken folks up on those offers, and that slowed me up a little bit, but I'm not really on much of a schedule. I'm out here for the adventure, so meeting all those people has been a pretty cool experience.
How fun is that? And I'm just looking here. It looks like you're close to 2/3, so you're not really that far behind schedule, especially because you might make better time going on from here.
Yep, yeah, exactly. No, I'm not too far behind schedule. I'm thinking I'm thinking I'm still in the wheelhouse of that 90 days, but maybe more towards 100 days. But in the large scheme of things, it's not too fair on pace.
Athletic Brewing is pioneering non-alcoholic craft beer. Yeah, I said non-alcoholic craft beer. And there's a number of reasons you might want to do that, whether you're training for an event, which a lot of our listeners are, or, if you're babysitting and don't want to be drunk in case something happens. I mean, stuff happens, but you still want to sit down and enjoy the game and have a beer. This is an incredible option for a full-flavored, full-bodied beer. Each can is only 50 to 70 calories, with IPA, golden ales, stouts, and tons of seasonal offerings. Athletic Brewing is a great option if you want that craft brewery taste, but not deal with the effects of alcohol itself. If you'd like to save 15% on your first order, go to athleticbrewing.com and use the code ADVENTURE at checkout. This episode is also sponsored by CS Instant Coffee, 100% Arabica coffee with compostable packaging. And you can find them at csinstant.coffee and use ADVENTURE at checkout for 20% off.
Tell us, if you would, what it's been like so far, the routine of it, and what your average day feels like being on the river.
Sure, yeah. I'll usually wake up sometime around 7, 8 o'clock or so. Typically I'm looking for large sandbars to camp on. Lately I've been looking for sandbars specifically with driftwood, so I can make a big bonfire at night, which is always soothing and fun. But yeah, usually I'll wake up, make some oatmeal coffee on a little camping stove that I have, pack up the boat, hit the water anywhere between around 8:30 and 10:30, and paddle throughout the day. There's all kinds of currents, islands, and just reading the water and reading the river is really interesting and fun for me. It's similar to picking a route up a mountain. You pick your line and try and pick the best line down the river that you can. So I'll paddle throughout the day, snack. I usually don't stop for lunch. I'll snack some peanut butter crackers and maybe an apple or so as I'm floating, and then usually look for camp. Again, trying to find sandbars. Doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you're in some thick forest and not always the best campsites, but that's the way it goes. So I'll look for that. Try and find it around sunset or, sometime around sunset, before sunset. Set up camp, make some dinner, make a fire, and hang out for a little bit, enjoy the stars, enjoy the sounds and views of the water, and call it a night and repeat.
So I know that when you first start an adventure, everything is new. And then after a while, you get into a routine and it starts to feel more familiar. But you also get farther removed from the life you had before the adventure, right? Yeah. And it resets the timing. It resets the meter and the way that life seems to flow. So how has that impacted you?
It's been great, Curt. That's certainly one of the reasons that I wanted to get on this trip, is to recharge and refresh. And it's been great. I mean, as you know, and I'm sure lots of the listeners who get out, whether for a weekend, a night, or whatever it might be, a longer trip, man, it just, I guess refreshing is the best word that I can use, just to be in the rhythms of your natural body. You eat when you're hungry. You wake up when you wake up. You go to bed when you're tired. There's no external factors causing you to do this or do that, or rush here or rush there. It's all on your own time, on your own clock. If I want to wake up and push for a big day and do a sunrise paddle, I can do it. If I want to wake up and take it slow and read a book for a bit in the morning and get off to a slow start, there's no harm, no foul there. And really the only factor that inhibits a day is weather, wind, rain. Wind is basically the biggest one. I've only had a few days where I've been windbound, but certainly if you get a big headwind, it can make paddling a bit tough.
Mm. So canoes are pretty light, and they kind of turn into a sail as the wind goes whipping over the surface of the water. I've had to try to paddle across a lake with a headwind like that. And man, if you get the bow just a little out of alignment with that headwind, it tries to spin you around, you know? That's got to be killer.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's tough. One thing that I learned, though, and actually kind of a funny story, in Winona, Minnesota, I stopped there and I ran into, by happenstance, I was staying with a guy and his son who I met the first day that I started my trip at the headwaters. And he introduced me to the owner of Winona Canoe Company, which is a large canoe manufacturer. They just so happened to have their 50th anniversary sale that weekend that I was in town. So we went to the sale, and the guy who I was staying with introduced me to the owner of the company. We got to chatting for a while. I'm a bit of a boat nerd. He's obviously a boat nerd. He's made great canoes for 50 years. And, you know, he asked me what I was paddling. And long story short, he ended up giving me a new boat to try and test out. So I was there on a Saturday. I planned to leave on Sunday, and he says, all right, you take this boat out on Sunday, see what you think about it, come back and talk to me on Monday, and we'll go from there. So I extended my stay an extra day, and paddled the boat. Boat felt great. It was way lighter. It's a carbon fiber boat, solo boat, and went back to him on Monday. We chatted. He gave me a tour of the entire Winona Canoe factory, and we talked boats for a while, and basically he hooked me up with this brand new, just pristine boat. But one of the cool things that I learned from speaking with him is that there's a thing called tilt. So depending on how you load your boat, whether it's in the front or the bow or the stern, the front or the back of the boat, you can mitigate some of that blowing that occurs, and as you mentioned, that sail, that like effect that can happen in the wind. So it was interesting to pick his brain and talk to him and pick up some new tactics that have helped me along the way as well.
So I'm just guessing here because I've not messed around with it much, but if you front load the canoe a little bit more, does that help you to keep it into the wind?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you front load your canoe in a headwind, it obviously makes a lower profile and has less surface area for that wind to blow you around. And likewise for a tailwind, if you load the back of your canoe, it'll be easier to paddle in a tailwind.
Awesome. And what about the currents? I mean, you're getting to big water now. I mean, there's some crazy currents in there, and it's not like whitewater currents. These are kind of like boiling currents and eddies where the river is changing flows. What does that do to a light craft like a canoe?
Yeah, it can definitely toy with it. It's something that I'm always cognizant of and looking for. Those boils, like you said, especially since I've been here south of St. Louis, they've gotten pretty big, and they seem to come out of nowhere. So those are a bit tricky. They can definitely kind of pull your boat one way or the other. So if you're not expecting them, it can definitely cause a hazard. But for the most part, I try and stay in the main current, in the main channel is what they call it here on the Mississippi, which for the most part flows pretty good and doesn't cause too many issues. But like I said, similar to mountain climbing or hiking or whatever, you choose the route that looks best to you, and that's kind of the part that I love about it, is reading the water and reading the river and trying to choose that route that looks best and has the least amount of turbulence and the least amount that'll hang me up.
Have you had instances where it felt like you were about to be capsized?
Only one. It was actually not too long ago in St. Louis. The Port of St. Louis is what they call the section of river that runs through downtown St. Louis, and that's because it really is a busy port with all kinds of barges and shipping containers moving around, moving coal, sand, all kinds of commodities. And it's a pretty narrow section there. And it was pretty turbulent through the whole time. And at one point I was paddling, and I was trying to stay close to the shore, towards one shore, to avoid a barge that was coming awfully close. And of course, as you get closer to a shore, the bottom of the river gets shallower, which in turn causes the waves to break. So as I was paddling close to that shore, I turned my boat, instead of facing head on into the wave and going over it, I tried to take it from the stern, from the back of the boat, and got caught almost sideways. And there was definitely a split second there that I thought I was going over. Luckily, I was able to keep her upright and took on a little bit of water. But that one definitely got the heart pumping a little bit.
And you mentioned you're trying to stay in the main current. Of course, that's where a lot of the barges are too. Do you feel like you have time to get out of the way if one's coming at you?
Yeah, for the most part, yes. Luckily, they don't move super fast, and they're big, massive boats and containers. So you can see them coming from a ways away. So I most of the time you have time, but sometimes in those narrow stretches, like for instance, the Port of St. Louis, there's just not really too many places you can go. So you just kind of have to get by, I guess. Try and figure it out, and point your nose due into the rollers, and don't try and take them broadside.
Have there been any instances where the barge pilot or captain saw you and had to shut it down?
Not that I know of. I did monitor the marine radio through that Port of St. Louis, and I did hear and conversed with one of the barge captains. As he mentioned, he gave a shout out just to all the other barges around, said, "Hey, just want to give a heads up, we got a kayaker coming through here to Port of St. Louis." So I gave him a quick thank you back. "Hey, Captain, thank you. This is kayaker here. Appreciate it." But other than that, I haven't noticed too much. No, they're pretty big. I don't think they always even see me. Pretty small vessel out there, and they're trying to do their job and just get there the quickest they can. So I don't think they're too concerned about me, to be honest.
Well, you're likely to pick up a little bit more barge traffic as you continue south. But that said, how frequently are you meeting a barge or being chased by a barge right now?
Pretty frequently. Certainly, maybe 5 to 10 a day, if not more. At this point, it's definitely picked up since I've been south of St. Louis and that lock and dam system has ended. It's just kind of a part of it. And to be honest, it's not that big of a concern, as I said, because they're pretty big and you can get out of the way pretty easily. They're not moving super fast, but they're definitely around, and it's just part of life out here on the Mississippi.
Wild. Well, how many hours a day are you paddling now?
It really all depends. But usually, let's see, 10 till about 4 or 5. So what is that? 6, 7 hours or so.
And how many miles a day do you think you're making?
Well, I'm picking up more speed as I'm going south, and I'll continue to do that as well. But for much of the trip, an average day would be anywhere to about 20 to 30 miles. But here south of St. Louis, I've noticed that I've been picking up more speed, so bigger days definitely come with more ease.
Well, here's one of my favorite questions for people that have done a big trip like this. We always have a set of expectations, and then we find out our expectations are wrong. They're always wrong. But what has been one of your biggest surprises? And maybe give us a positive surprise, but also one that you thought was a negative surprise.
Sure. I would say the biggest positive surprise, Curt, has been the generosity of people on the river. It's been unbelievable how many people have, taken me into their home, offered to feed me, give me a shower, do some laundry. Numerous people. And B, just paddling. I mean, there was one stretch where I was paddling in Iowa, around LeClaire, Iowa. And it was a weekend. Lots of folks were out, enjoying the water in their boats. And there was one section where there was a big sandy beach and lots of people were out just enjoying the day. And I must have had 5 or 6 different people stop me and say, hey, where are you headed? And then once they figure out that I'm going all the way south to the Gulf, oh, do you need anything? Are you hungry? One guy was up on a hill. He had the grill fired up, and he yells down, hey, if you want a brat, come on up. I'll feed you. And
right on.
And people offering to, like I said, just give me a shower or feed or whatever it is. People asking, do you need anything? It's been really, really cool and neat to see the generosity of folks, and certainly met some really cool and amazing people along the way as well.
Mm. What about a negative surprise?
Negative surprise, huh? I don't know if it's just my, I tend to try and not focus on the negatives, but I can't think of too many negatives. I guess wind has been pretty steady. It's just kind of been a part of it. I've had headwinds for quite some time. I don't know if it's as much as a surprise, but rain and clouds. I had about a week straight of rain and wind and clouds, and that got me, that was probably the lowest I've been on the trip, just mentally. Wasn't super low by any means, but it's tough when it's been a week straight of rain and wind, and you're wet and you can't dry anything out. Came down with a little bit of a cold, but that's kind of all part of the experience. So I don't know if I could even maybe classify that as a negative. There was one night where the water was rising, the river was rising due to a bunch of rain up river that I didn't realize the water was rising, and I was camping on a sandbar, and I woke up in the middle of the night and to go to the bathroom, and I poked my head out of my tent, and my boat was just about floating away. The water had risen so much, the nose of my boat was still on the sandbar, but the stern was floating in the water, so that was a bit of a shocker. So I get up, drag my boat into the middle of the sandbar, then I noticed that the water was encroaching in on my tent, so I of course, in the middle of the night, I didn't want to move my tent unless I absolutely had to, so I set out 5-gallon bucket, and I told myself, all right, I'm going to kind of wake up in an hour, and if the water is getting close to this 5-gallon bucket, then I'll have to move the tent. Sure enough, I poked my head out an hour later, and the 5-gallon bucket was surrounded by water, and at this point, the river had risen and was maybe 3 or 4 feet away from my tent, so I had to pick up my tent, move it higher up on the sandbar, next to my boat, and I thought that I was safe at that point. And then by the time morning came around, I heard waves crashing in, and I thought, man, that water sounds real close. So I woke up again and peeked my head out of the tent, and sure enough, the whole sandbar was pretty much gone, engulfed in water. And my tent and boat were standing on the last dry spots of the whole sandbar. So I quickly woke up, and without any breakfast or much else, packed up and got out of there as quick as I could.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I wanted to ask about camping. I know that people are going to ask that. Is there any challenge finding a place to pitch your tent where you feel safe?
It's been surprisingly easy, especially in the lock and dam system. So in northern Minnesota, for all intents and purposes, there's 3 main sections of the river. There's the northern stretch, which is the headwaters to Minneapolis. Then there's Minneapolis to St. Louis, which is the middle Mississippi. And then from St. Louis to New Orleans, essentially the lower Mississippi. And they all have a little bit different characteristics. The northern stretch, there's the DNR up there in Minnesota does a great job of, they have lots of established campsites, backcountry campsites, where they have like a fire pit and a picnic table. So that stretch, super easy to find camp spots. And then from Minneapolis to St. Louis, all the islands that are created from the lock and dam system, there's tons and tons of just real big islands are all public. So You can camp on any of those islands, and those islands, lots of sandbars and trees and forested areas, so not too difficult there. And then moving south from St. Louis to where I'm at right now, and I assume will continue as I continue south towards New Orleans. Lots of big sandbars and sandy beaches, and those have been great camping spots, and especially the ones with lots of driftwood. You can pretty easily make a big bonfire.
You know, there's something so romantic about the Mississippi River, and I don't know if it's Mark Twain and Huckleberry Finn, you know, or if it's just all the stories that we've heard about the riverboats and, you know, how the Mississippi was the major highway for the central U.S. for so long. But going back and reliving that history, and in part, you're really just in the midst of that heavy historic part of the river right now. But I guess the question that I'm coming to here is, how's it been to encounter this great nation from its mightiest river by going down the river at the river's pace?
It's been beyond words, Curt. That's part of a big pull for the Mississippi and for doing this trip was to be able to see the country through its, through the heart of it, through the main artery of this country, which is the Mississippi River. And it has been, it's been amazing. I mean, the people, as I mentioned, have, that's been a huge plus. All the kind folk that I've met so far, all the cool places I've seen. I stayed on an island, an inhabited island of the Mississippi, two of them actually. I stayed at one, Nicollet Island, which is just off of, downtown Minneapolis. I ran into a couple, travelers there, who were on the water as well and offered to put me up for the evening. So I stayed on an inhabited island there. I stayed on an island called, Sabula, Iowa. Bet you didn't know that Iowa had a, island town, but indeed they do. And, there's a little trivia fact for you. Iowa has an island, and I stayed on that island, and I stopped in Hannibal, Missouri, which is the home of Mark Twain, and that was neat to see the history and all the Mark Twain stuff there, and see riverboats going by every now and again, and the barge traffic, and it's been real cool to be able to experience all the history and be a part of it.
Well, it looks like your next major city is going to be Memphis. Any special plans for Memphis when you get there?
It's funny. I have a Facebook page, a blog that I've got going that if folks are interested, they can check it out. It's on Facebook, BuffaloRoamer, BuffaloRoamer, Roamer, all one word. And I just had a gentleman contact me on that and said that he'd been, I don't know him from Tom, but said that he'd been following the blog and was interested in the story and would be willing to put me up when I get to Memphis. So I'm going to take him up on that offer, I hope, and enjoy some barbecue and tip a couple cold ones and enjoy a stay with some more nice river folk.
Oh, that sounds fun too. Well, I tell you what, I just can't imagine what that is like for you. And I know that probably our listeners are out there saying, tell me more. I want to know. This just sparks the imagination. It really does. Has the trip so far been what you expected? I mean, is it all that you hoped it would be?
It's been all and more. I mean, it's a lot of the things that we've hit on, just the motions of getting out of that, day-to-day grind, if you will, or day-to-day life in terms of waking up, going to work, going to bed, and doing city life, if you will, compared to just the natural tendency of eat when you're hungry, sleep when you're tired, all those types of things has been great. And the surprising thing to me, I guess one of the most pleasantly surprising things has been the physical beauty of the river. I mean, the area from about Hastings, Minnesota down through Iowa, they call it the driftless area. And there was no glaciers in that area to flatten out, like much of the Midwest is flat farmland. In this area, there's big, tall bluffs and rocks protruding and lots of topography and just stunning, just absolutely gorgeous area. And the wildlife, eagles, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of bald eagles. That's probably the most wildlife that I've seen is bald eagles, deer, beavers, fish, you name it. I saw a black bear swimming across the Mississippi, not too far ahead of me up in northern Minnesota. That was really cool. And, it's just that combined with, the history of the river and meeting folks along the way. It's been amazing. And I'm looking forward to, making it to Memphis and to New Orleans and everything in between, and then, tasting salt water in the Gulf of Mexico.
So I was going to ask, how far are you going to go? What is the end of the trip?
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out. But in my head at the moment, I'd like to paddle south of New Orleans into the Gulf of Mexico, and I'd like to go out far enough that I don't really see the mixing of the Mississippi and the ocean anymore. I'd like to go until the ocean's blue, and I can look back and kind of see the dirty water of the Mississippi entering the Gulf, and hop out of the boat and take a swim in the salt water and and call it good.
Wow, that's going to be a ways out there.
I know it. Yeah, it is. But I figure if I'm going all the way, I might as well do it right.
Well, that's really cool. I'm looking at the map now at the Mississippi Delta as it goes out into the Gulf. And it looks like once you get past New Orleans, you still have over 100 more miles to go.
Yep.
And if you got on the wrong channel, man, you could get lost in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways. To do it, and there's actually a popular route as well that diverts off of north of Baton Rouge. It's called the Appalachia, I believe is how you pronounce it. That's a popular route that people take as well, and that diverts you, so you don't paddle through Baton Rouge or New Orleans, but supposedly that section is more of a wilderness stretch, and that's a popular route as well. But yeah, it's quite a ways south of New Orleans, and not a whole bunch down there as well in terms of people or towns or anything like that. So be interesting to see what happens once I make it into the ocean. I'm hoping to be able to maybe hitch a ride with a fisherman or some sort of vessel coming back upstream, so I don't have to paddle back up to New Orleans.
Wow. And at that point, the Mississippi River's got to be over a mile wide. I mean, this is a massive body of water.
Yeah, absolutely. And it gets real big and deep. And actually, I believe with all those channels, it might actually thin out. It's an interesting river in that St. Louis to New Orleans or Memphis, it gets super wide, but then as it gets closer to the Gulf, I think it actually thins out, surprisingly, which is kind of counterintuitive, but I'll find out.
Cool stuff, man. Well, let's go full circle. We started this show by saying, why did you do it, right? And what got you out the door? But I want to go full circle and talk about this idea of adventure and how it's impacting your life. And why do adventure? It sounds like this isn't your first time around the block doing some really cool trips. But why do you do adventure? What's it for?
Man, there's a whole host of things, and it's hard to distill into words. But for me, it's just something in my gut. When I first started thinking about this trip, I put it off for a while, and then it just kept coming up in my gut, and I would think about it and just tense up and get so excited. And it's just something I love, and the reason that I love it is, I think, similar to the reason a lot of folks find a calling in the woods or in the mountains or whatever it may be, is you learn so much about yourself. I mean, I'm out here by myself 65 days. When things hit the fan, there's only one person to get me out of it, and that's me for the most part. And you learn what you can take. You learn how to push yourself. You learn just so much about yourself. I mean, the ways in which you function, the ways in which you function best, and also gives you time to think and kind of distill your thoughts and maybe plan different opportunities and think about what's important. And that's also something I think adventure does for me, is that it's hard to explain to folks who haven't done it or who don't understand. It's kind of, you have to show them, I think. But it's when you go, 60 days, I've had plenty of showers, but when you go 60 days without a shower or a week without a shower, that hot water running down your back when you finally get one is so much better. When you finally do sit down for a steak dinner, that steak tastes so much richer than it did if you have it every night of the week, or if it's a comfort that you're used to. And so I think in the same way, with the steak, it's with people you love as well. When you're away from those that you love, you're able to realize what matters and to realize that those folks are important in your life, and that once you're off the trip, you want to spend more time with them.
Perspective, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great word to describe it.
Lots of perspective. I've long argued that adventure does improve people's lives. Health, stress relief, life experiences. And one of my favorites I keep talking about is that when we have an adventure, that becomes a signpost in our memory. That year I remember, that trip I remember, But
yeah, absolutely.
I think that few people ever embark on an adventure of the magnitude of what you're doing. And I think it's kudos to you for doing it. It sounds fascinating. And, man, we'd love to have you back on when you finish, when you taste that salt water. We need to hear the rest of the trip. Got to know how it went.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hop back on and share how the rest went. And also, it's been fun. I've been working with some classrooms. I've been working with 4 classrooms, 2 in South Dakota where I live, and 2 in my hometown of Illinois, the same middle school that I went to, between 4th and 6th graders. And I guess that's been the other 2 surprises for me, is when I first embarked on this trip, I kind of thought that I was doing it alone. I thought that, I'm going out here by myself. I kind of figured most people would dismiss my, my ambition as, he's, some sort of hippie or something along those lines. But, in working with these kids, it's been unbelievable to see their excitement and their inspiration from me sharing my stories with them. And, it's been, refueling and refreshing to me to see their excitement. And I think for them as well, it's been neat to be exposed to somebody who's, pushing the limits and trying to follow their dreams and doing what they love. And in that same respect as well, this blog that I've been doing on Facebook, again, BuffaloRoamer is where you can find me. I've been so surprised by how many people have taken interest in the trip and in the writing. I've had multiple people tell me, they look forward to reading it every day, and that blew me away. Because as I said, I kind of figured this was just something I was doing for myself for the sake of adventure. And then once you figure out that people are inspired by it and people are moved by it, it's kind of a gift that keeps on giving, both for them and for myself. So it's been pretty neat.
Very, very neat. Yeah, that's very, very cool. Well, man, we burned through our time, and I would love to ask you a dozen other questions, but I guess can you close us out here with an account of something that happened on the river? That it can be funny, it could be inspirational, it could be when things didn't go right, but just give us a story about something that stood out in your memory.
Sure. There's been so many things. Again, the people I've met, the gentleman who owns Winona Canoe, Mike, meeting him was just amazing. But I guess one of the things that sticks out to me is, you might hear some wind in the background here. It's picked up a bit. But one of the things that sticks out to me is some of the tough days. On day about 45 or so, I was near Muscatine, Iowa, and the wind was roaring. The rain was dumping sideways. It had been raining for a week straight. I was coming down with a little bit of a sickness. I was lying in my tent. This was the same night that I had to pull the canoe and tent away from the sand.
No.
And and the wind was blowing my rain fly in my tent up against the inside shelter, and rain was dripping from the outside into the tent. So I had a little pool of water inside of my tent. I'm lying there thinking, gosh, this is terrible. What am I doing? Blah, blah, blah. And the next day continued to rain. I was cold. I was wet. Just kind of down in the dumps a little bit. And that night, the following day, that evening, as I was paddling, the clouds began to break. The sun came out, and a beautiful orange sunset painted the whole sky. I was camping on a big sandbar at the time. I laid all my stuff out to dry, and I kicked my feet up, and I thought, man, this is great. This is why we do it. Struggle. There's a big thing in our today's society. I think people don't want to struggle and don't want to face adversity, but that's what strengthens you. And when I saw that sunrise or that sunset, and knew that tomorrow would be a clear day after a week of rain straight, boy, that was that was a great feeling. I still smile thinking about it right now, and just knowing how cold and wet I was, and that tomorrow was going to be a great day, was pretty powerful.
Again, perspective. That's what it's all about, man. It's about getting out there and having those life experiences and finding out what you're made of, and then gaining a fresh appreciation for stuff that we might otherwise take for granted.
Yep, absolutely. That's the name of the game.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, man, for carving out some time in your busy rowing schedule to be on the Adventure Sports Podcast. We've thoroughly enjoyed our time with you today.
Absolutely, Curt. Appreciate you having me on, and look forward to listening to future episodes as I'm cruising down the Mighty Miss.
Right on, man. And let's hook up once you're done. We got to find out the rest of the story. So,
all right, buddy. Sounds like a plan.
All right, and for all the listeners out there, thanks again for listening today. And until the next show, get out there, have some fun.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for listening to this episode. It really means the world to us that you want to spend your time with us. If you'd like to help us further, please just leave us a review on iTunes, share us on social media, tell your friends about us. You can become a patron, a supporter of the show for $5 a month at patreon.com/Adventure Sports Podcast. And if you know somebody that would make a good guest, reach out. We're always looking for good adventure and outdoor stories. And lastly, thank you to our sponsors, whose messages follow right now. Athletic Brewing makes the best non-alcoholic craft beer. Go to their website at athleticbrewing.com and use the code in our show notes to save 15% on your first order. After all this adventure talk, if you're needing some gear yourself, but you need some advice before buying, go to backpacktribe.com, where you can ask questions to the owners who have experience with all the gear, as well as all of it for sale right there on their website.